Finally, we are at the section 3.0 and the meat of our subjection, Brownian bombardment. Brownian bombardment is basically discussing that per Einstein's paradigm in 1905, that the atomistic view of the liquid and the pollen is such that the pollen is getting bombarded by tons of little particles in the liquid, and they push and shove it and basically bullying it in all kinds of directions, and then we get that jitter in the liquid, on the surface of the liquid or whatever else we can place it. In order for us to formulate what he had envisaged then, we go back to what we did earlier, except this time Ft that we were playing with before is actually a force. And we're gonna compute the impulse force from it. But before we do that, we set a dimension 3. We set in length to 1. So we previously d was a funky number. And then we introduced the frame rate, because we're simulating and making animations and sequence of animations and all kinds of other goodies out of it. Therefore, we have to kind of be organized on how we organize our output animations in future. And if we have a frame rate of 10 per second, then 1 over frame rate is dt. In this case will be 0.1. And we set the mass to 1 for now, so it's easier for the eyes to follow the numbers. And here we are, put this cursor any place on your cell where this is typed, and then let's go and check and make sure that it worked. Yep. And run it again. Yep. That is the F list we had, except we have 4 elements in there, and what we see there is F 4 times instantiated, and they're all different numbers, as you can see. Okay. And but there's something else we did here. The F that we had was a force. We divided it by mass. That gave us acceleration, and then vis-a-vis the Taylor series, 1/2 dt squared will give us the displacement due to this impact action of this impulse force. And that displacement is all that which will cause a displacement for our jittery ball. We are in this particular case, as opposed to the earlier Brownian things publication, we do not consider a velocity or drift velocity. Or for the particle, we are assuming that the liquid is very viscous, and after the pulse moves the particle a certain amount, which is this little dinky thousandths of whatever unit of length we are considering, and that little bit of distance it goes at the end has velocity 0 until the forces are applied again. And this is not a necessarily good assumption. It limits our simulations, but it's pretty good enough for the first time you're doing this in your life. So you assume there is no initial velocity, and you're at 0, 0 origin for the vectors, all vectors, and then you take your impulse force and then you divide by mass, and then 1/2 dt squared, the difference in time, which is 1/10th, our frame rate, and repeated 4 times, you have a bombardment of 4. Okay, now we take it as is, bombardment of the 4, and let me see if I can run this over here. That's our animator. Here we are. And it animates the frames. We have 4 frames here. Okay, so we apply the force 4 times. As you can see, the force is that vector here. Let me stop it for a second. You can see that's the impulse force applied to our jittery ball, and we let it go, and The same happens again and again and again. Okay, now what we do is that we're gonna go down here, make it a little bit more realistic, and and increase the number of impulse to 40. See what happens. That means 40 iterations for the impulse, one after the other. Okay, now more like it. Look what happens to the ball itself is jittering. That is the core fundamental impulse force model that we all know about from physics papers and Einstein's model and so on and so forth. And that's basically what we created here, basically by applying Taylor series and obtaining the Newton laws of motions first and second. Then we apply the impulse force, short-lived force. We calculate displacement by it, and then we just animate it frame by frame by frame, and we get the Brownian motion for a stand-still ball that contains the atoms and polymers and whatever the pollen thing is supposed to be.